You hear laughter echoing through marble halls. Wine splashes against painted pottery. Then you see her, a girl no older than your sister, branded on the thigh with a hot iron mark still raw, standing in a corner as men place coins on a table and argue over who goes first. This is Athens, the birthplace of democracy, the cradle of Western philosophy, and behind its gleaming temples, something unspeakable thrives in the shadows. Before we step into this hidden world together, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It genuinely amazes me that a story buried for over 2,000 years can connect us across continents today. The year is 420 BCE. While Socrates debates virtue in the agora and sculptors carve perfection into marble, a parallel economy hums beneath the city's golden surface. The Greeks call them pornai, a word that will echo through millennia, but here, in this moment, it simply means those for sale. They are not courtesans, not companions. They are inventory. And the price? 2 barley flatbreads, less than a jug of watered wine, less than what you'd pay for a handful of olives in the marketplace. Court records from the era, speeches by orators like Demosthenes, reveal that a single woman in these establishments might service 6 to 10 men daily. Her earnings? Barely enough to purchase a small bowl of lentils. Meanwhile, the brothel owner grows wealthy, paying a portion directly into Athens' treasury as tax revenue. The city's magnificence, its theater festivals, its public works, all funded in part by what happens in these rooms. But here's where the story turns darker than you might imagine. Athenian law set no minimum age for entry into prostitution. Archaeological evidence from grave sites and medical papyri suggests girls as young as 10 were exploited in these establishments. Each bore a permanent brand burned into her flesh, a mark of ownership, like livestock. The Greek historian Athenaeus, writing centuries later but drawing on earlier sources, described these brands matter-of-factly as though discussing the marking of amphorae for wine shipment. Inside these establishments, a brutal hierarchy governed every breath. If a girl refused to work, the punishments were designed not merely to hurt, but to annihilate hope. Public whippings with leather straps studded with metal, starvation for days in locked rooms, and something worse, a ritual that marked the arrival of every new girl. According to an account attributed to a merchant named Pappy of Thessaly, newly acquired girls were assaulted in full view of the brothel's occupants and regular patrons. This wasn't random violence. It was theater. A deliberate performance meant to shatter any illusion of escape, to show every woman present what resistance would cost. Onlookers jeered. Some laughed. The suffering became entertainment, a prelude to the evening's commerce. And here's the twisted economics. A newly arrived girl commanded 10 times the usual price. Men paid premium rates for someone unmarked by the trade's brutality. Ancient writers discuss these transactions with the casual tone of someone selecting fruit at market, comparing one purchase to another, noting value and freshness. Privacy didn't exist. Women worked in corners of large rooms, separated only by thin cloth partitions or woven mats. Every sound carried. Every cry of pain became background noise, a soundtrack to the waiting area where men drank wine and discussed philosophy between turns. The brothel owners, ever the entrepreneurs, sorted women into categories that catered to specific appetites. Nubian women, exceptionally short women, mute women who couldn't scream, women who still fought back, women labeled unbroken. Each category had its price point, its dedicated clientele. 5th century pottery, the kind displayed in museums today, depicts competitions where men wagered on who could overpower a resisting woman. Violence as sport. Graffiti scratched into brothel walls tells an even grimmer story. Some customers paid extra for the privilege of inflicting permanent harm. Slashing faces, breaking teeth, burns from oil lamps deliberately tipped. These weren't accidents of rough handling. They were purchased experiences, itemized and priced like any other service. Archaeological excavations in the Kerameikos district of Athens have uncovered walls bearing crude tallies, marks that scholars believe tracked such transactions. Some women were advertised specifically for this purpose. Split lips, shattered cheekbones, scars, injuries that certain men sought deliberately. To them, a woman's agony became aesthetic. Her screams, according to one disturbing fragment of comedic verse, were likened to music for the wine-drunk soul. In the same city that gave the world Sophocles and Euripides, cruelty against women proved one of the most profitable trades. But the daily brutality paled beside what occurred during religious festivals. During the Dionysia, the great theatrical festival honoring the god of wine and ecstasy, prostitutes were distributed to groups of men free of charge as part of what was framed as sacred ritual. Ancient accounts describe these scenes without shame. Wine flowing freely, music from double-reed alloy filling the air, groups of intoxicated men assaulting women while bets were placed on endurance. On these days, any remaining dignity vanished entirely. A woman became a living offering, her suffering reframed as devotion to the gods. Medical writings from the Hippocratic corpus mention deaths from internal injuries, blood loss, and suffocation during festival periods. Yet priests claimed such acts honored Dionysus. Wine and blood mingled. Dying breaths were interpreted as prayers for abundant harvests, for the city's prosperity. When the festivals ended, survivors were dragged back to work. The dead were removed beyond the city walls and discarded in ravines like broken pottery. These weren't tragedies to the Athenians. They were externalities of celebration, as routine as cleaning up after a feast. For even the smallest infractions, spilling wine, mispronouncing a patron's name, allowing oneself to cry, a woman faced punishment designed to break the spirit while preserving the body's usefulness. She might be locked in a lightless storage room without food or water for days, or tied to a post in the open courtyard, left through freezing winter nights or under the brutal summer sun. Owners called this character correction. Objects at hand became instruments of discipline. Wooden clubs, heavy ceramic cups, the blunt ends of knives. Over time, women learned to mask agony behind forced smiles, because tears or screams only provoked further violence. In a culture that celebrated the perfect human form in sculpture, these women's bodies became living records of cruelty, layers of bruises, burn marks, scars that told stories no one wanted to read. If a woman attempted escape, the law treated it not as a cry for freedom, but as theft, stealing property from an owner. The penalties were public and vicious. Runaways were branded on the forehead or chest with hot metal, marked forever as deserters. Court records describe even worse fates. Some captured women were nailed to wooden boards and displayed in the agora as warnings. Death came slowly, from thirst or infections festering around the nail wounds. It was justice as a spectacle, deterrence carved into flesh. Some desperate women sought a sanctuary in temples, throwing themselves before altars of Hera or Artemis, goddesses who supposedly protected the vulnerable. But priests, often swayed by modest bribes, handed them back to their owners. Property rights trumped divine mercy. The women were dragged away in chains, their blood staining temple steps, stains scrubbed clean by other slaves before dawn's light. Each failed escape brought harsher retribution. Athenian justice had refined the art of breaking a woman's will while keeping her functional for commerce. Yet even functionality had limits. Medical writings note that few of these women lived past their mid-20s. The causes of death were relentless: sexually transmitted infections, wounds that festered without treatment, sheer exhaustion, malnutrition, and the cumulative damage of repeated trauma. Those with visible infections, foul-smelling discharges, open sores, weren't removed from service. They worked until they physically collapsed. Owners considered medical care a waste of resources. A new girl cost less than a physician's fee. Complaints from customers about the smell of decay were met with beatings administered to the woman, as though pain could restore dying tissue. Archaeological excavations near ancient brothel sites have uncovered haunting evidence. Female skeletons with severe pelvic fractures, skulls showing signs of blunt force trauma, ribs broken and healed improperly, spinal deformities from years of strain. These bones testify silently to systematic violence. When a woman became too sick to earn, she was carried beyond the walls and abandoned, whether breathing or not. In Athens, the city that defined classical beauty, women's bodies were discarded like shattered amphorae. Pregnancy was viewed as property damage. The response was swift and brutal. To prevent births, owners forced women to drink toxic brews, pennyroyal, tansy, other herbs that caused violent illness. They struck women in the abdomen, made them lift impossibly heavy loads until miscarriage occurred. Medical texts describe abortion procedures that read like torture manuals, scalding liquids poured into the womb, sharpened implements pushed inside. If pregnancy couldn't be stopped, birth happened on the same filthy mat where customers were serviced. No midwives, no medicine, no sanitation. Many women bled to death or died from fever in the days after delivery. Archaeologists have found tiny bones in drainage channels and refuse heaps behind ancient brothel sites. Infant remains discarded without ceremony. The killing of newborns was routine, especially girls, especially children fathered by slaves. For many women, ending a child's life was the only mercy they could offer, sparing them this same fate. Under Athenian law, these women had no legal personhood. Their bodies and labor belonged entirely to their owners. They were trapped by fabricated debts for food, shelter, clothing, debts that grew daily with interest and arbitrary fines. Refusal of any client, regardless of his reputation for violence or perverse demands, was impossible. Consent wasn't a concept the law recognized for them. Court documents reveal women who attempted to seek justice for mistreatment, but the system was designed against them. A slave's testimony couldn't be used against a free man unless she was tortured first, to verify her honesty. In the society that invented democracy, half the population was excluded from it entirely. Enslaved women occupied the lowest rung, valued less than the oxen that plowed fields, which at least were fed and sheltered consistently. Yet, occasionally, rarely, a woman might rise slightly above the common misery, sometimes through the favor of a wealthy patron who purchased her freedom, sometimes through an owner who found profit in training her as a musician or dancer for elite symposia. These hetairai, companions, occupied a different world from the pornai, but the path from one to the other was nearly impossible to walk. When a woman did become a favorite, adorned in silk, given a private room, decked in jewelry, she understood the truth beneath the gilding. Her position was utterly fragile, dependent on a man's shifting whims. He could send her back to the common brothel without warning, could have her killed for the smallest disobedience. Historical records show that these favored women were often treated as tokens of hospitality. A master might offer his mistress to a visiting friend for the night, loaning her like a fine wine cup, expecting her return the next morning with a smile. Even at the highest tier of this hierarchy, a woman remained property. Golden chains held as firmly as iron shackles, and age stripped away value with brutal efficiency. Whether a woman had been a street-level slave or a cherished mistress, time rendered her worthless. The end was always the same, a nameless death followed by deliberate erasure. These women were denied proper Greek funeral rites. Their bodies were dragged beyond city limits and abandoned in ravines or unmarked pits. Against sacred custom, they received no tombstones, no inscriptions, no offerings. Even if a woman somehow achieved freedom, the stain of her past rendered her untouchable. Former prostitutes were excluded from civic life. Living ghosts, present but erased. Archaeologists have found female remains mingled with pottery shards and household refuse. No markers, no names, no memory. In a culture that immortalized warriors and poets in epic verse, these women's lives vanished without trace. Their suffering was too common to preserve in poetry, but the cruelty extended beyond forgetting. It was woven into entertainment. Comic playwrights like Aristophanes depicted prostitutes as crude, lustful, deserving only of mockery or violence. In Athenian theaters, crowds roared with laughter at stage scenes of rape and beating. The pain of women served up as comedy. In homes, painted pottery displayed scenes of gang assault and torture, decorating wine cups and dining vessels. Violence against women became a decorative motif. So normalized it blended into everyday aesthetics. Poets sometimes celebrated elegant hetairae in verse, but brothel women appeared only as objects of ridicule. Their cries became metaphors. Their tears turned into imagery for dew. In a society that elevated tragic theater into high art, the real tragedies endured by living women were transformed into jokes. Athenian culture perfected willful blindness. Turning away from suffering it deemed undeserving of compassion. And this blindness was profitable. Brothels paid steady taxes into the city treasury. The trade in women was lucrative business. Democracy flourished while half the population lived in bondage and women were shut out of political life entirely. While Socrates questioned the meaning of virtue in the public square, hundreds of women were traded as commodities just streets away. While Pericles praised Athens' noble spirit, the city enriched itself through organized exploitation. The marble of the Parthenon, the grandeur of temples, the magnificence of theaters, all supported by profits from an economy that consumed women's lives. The splendor of the Golden Age was financed in part by blood and bodies of slaves whose names history chose to forget. Modern accounts of ancient Greece, in textbooks, museum displays, tourist guides, often gloss over this reality. The dark underbelly is sanitized or omitted entirely, as though acknowledging it might tarnish antiquity's glory. The tens of thousands of women who endured this life remain absent from the official story, their pain erased from the narrative we tell ourselves about the birth of Western civilization. Yet their absence is not silence. In the ruins of Athens, shadows still linger. The unmarked graves, the fragments of pottery bearing their images, the faint graffiti scratched into brothel walls, the bones mingled with refuse in ancient trash heaps. All whisper the same truth. They were here, they suffered, they died without names, and someone needed to remember. Not because their story is comfortable, not because it fits neatly into our myths about classical civilization, but because forgetting them again would be the final cruelty, the one we would be responsible for. In the city that gave us the word democracy, these women had no voice. In the culture that defined philosophy as love of wisdom, their wisdom, how to survive another day, how to endure the unendurable, was never written down. In the society that built temples to gods of justice, they received none. But the stones remember. The earth holds their bones. And now, across millennia, their story reaches you, wherever you are in the world, traveling through time to finally be heard.